Hey, friends, welcome back to the podcast. I'm Gary, your host, and today we have someone you've met and talked with before. His name is, well, the man, the myth, the legend, James Attaway with Attaway Audio. I am super excited because James is going to be joining us at the launch event coming up on September 10th at 1 p.m. If you haven't registered, you need to do so now. It's going to be an amazing event. Can't wait to see you there. Now, on with the show. Here's to James Attaway. James, welcome back to the podcast, man. It's so good to have you, the quintessential king of audio and, all things related in that regard. I love it. Dude, the beard is getting nice. Look at that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's growing on me. Every once in a while, I got to test it out. I got to see how much gray is in there, like how much silver is there. And now I know. So, I'm acting my age a little bit. Well, I'm looking my age.
Anyway, we got James back on the podcast. I'm excited to have James. James, life has been good. Life's been crazy. Life's been fun. Life's been weird. Tell the family and friends here at BoxCast what you've been up to recently.
Oh man, well, I center my work around family. Like there's a lot of people that work in the church world that it's easy to become so ministry focused that you forget about your first ministry, which is your family.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been, we homeschool, we garden, we do all the stuff around the house to make our home kind of the center of our universe, so that we can be with each other. We can, disciple our kids first and foremost. So I've been keeping busy with that. We've got 4 kids. So we've got our hands full, we've got our hearts full. And then, we've been making video courses and making YouTube videos, trying to help churches sound better, understand what their sound gear is doing, so it's not mysterious anymore, and then know how to get confidence in, using the tools to make it sound great, so that the audio is the portion of the worship service that doesn't take anybody's attention when we're trying to give our attention to the most important things in church.
Right.
And so I can do that and help churches do that when I mostly stay at home. I'll travel on occasion and we'll go out to churches to do some training or system tune-ups is what I call it. And we do a little bit of upgrades, but mostly, we're focusing on the gear between the ears. And then, there's a lot of sound systems that are set up well. There's a lot of sound systems that need a little bit of tuning, or, somebody was a little more dangerous than knowledgeable, or knowledgeable enough to be dangerous. So we get the system worked out so that it's easy for people to work on, and then we train people how to do that. I've been doing that in person a little bit. I got a few more of those coming up this fall. But yeah, working from home, it's the life. Cool. And going to church with my family, I get to be a regular congregant, which is a huge blessing. So we sit together, which I'm super pumped about that.
That's man, that's awesome, because of the simple fact that, there's not always enough time with your family. Like, running business or doing, all the extracurricular things are great. But again, your first ministry is your family, and that's fantastic. You're making audio so much better. And I love the courses, and I love your content that's been coming out, and you look great. You're like, your whole video quality stepped up. So I'm just glad to have you back. But listen, friends, if you're not familiar with James Attaway from Attaway Audio, go take a look at our podcast with him for the first time last year, down below in the description. James is a big proponent for making your audio sound better, not only in your house and in the sanctuary or in your venue, but also in your live stream, which is why we like him, because BoxCast is all about the live streaming audio and video. So, James, today we got some really good things I want to chat with you, because I know that you are a systems guy, right? I know that you have put systems in place. I know that you work through systems. I know that you, like, just a little bit ago, you literally told Siri to put a reminder in to do something on your phone, and then my Siri started talking to me, and your Siri started talking to my Siri, and it was just like all these Siris doing Siri things, which was interesting. But I know that you do systems, and I want to talk specifically about some of the things that you're encountering in systems that are literally changing the way audio is done. Primarily, we want to talk about the current audio scope of using your audio and content for outreach, but what is happening with that audio? Like, what are some of the things that are coming into play that you see now could be big players in the future?
Like, I've seen a lot of iterations of new technology coming into the console and like mixing space. I did a video a few years ago about like how AI could help, let's say if you're mixing your broadcast in a digital audio workstation, could you
Hmm.
use some of the auto mix functions from like Isotope's Nectar plugin, where it's got kind of a track assistant or mixing assistant, where it listens to a chunk of the audio, analyzes what it is, and then makes some EQ and compression changes for like kind of an auto mix thing.
Hmm.
And it made an improvement, but it didn't make it like, wow, my mix is amazing now, right? And there've
Right.
been iterations since then. So I'm sure it's improved, and I could probably make an update video to see what the latest versions have been able to produce. But we're getting to the point where even in like Allen and Heath has just come out with their CQ series consoles, which are mostly, iPad run.
Yeah.
There's some touchscreen stuff with it too, but they have some stuff in there where it's kind of like uh one knob to kind of shape your tone on different types of instruments. And so it's not necessarily presets, but it's presets or like a range of presets for how do we make this work,
Right.
or how can you adapt what your sound is to what you want it to be, and you're still at the controls to like shape how punchy your kick drum is or how much power it has. Like those different parameters, they're able to do some stuff in the background where they're adjusting several different things at once to make it feel a certain way. Or, like it's kind of like the Waves One Knob series, if you're a studio
Oh
nerd
yeah.
and have done that, where like, a brighter knob. Well, you turn the knob and it gets brighter. Yes, we could have done that with EQ, but there there are people who are programming stuff to make it easier to shift things the way that you want it without having to know what all the different controls do. Like, what's the difference between frequency, bandwidth, and Q? I don't know. I just turn the knob and that makes my kick drum sound better.
Right.
Because everybody's figured out pretty quickly that presets don't work, right? Presets would suppose you have the same microphone placement, the same tuning on the instrument, the same, this and that. Lots of stuff upstream of that. But with things that are like a simple, like one knob kind of thing, they're making progress toward pushing stuff the way that people want to hear it more easily.
Hmm.
I see that as a benefit for people that are inclined to know what they want to hear, but don't necessarily know how to get it there. Those tools can help them get that there quicker and with less fuss. Like I don't have to learn how to do this, so I just kind of put this mode on. I shift it till it feels right, right? So there
Right.
are some people out there that know how it should feel and want the help with those tools to do that. I think that's a huge benefit for the audio community because it helps people get their foot in the door, and now they're making sound better. That's a good thing, even if you don't understand all the nerdy engineering stuff behind it.
Right.
It's kind of similar to like, programmers and coders that have kind of the drag and drop, uh, you know, batches of code to try to program something. That's not cheating, in my opinion. That's making
Sure.
it easier for people to actually do stuff without having to learn all the key commands and all the nerdy
So
background things.
with that then, okay, so I mean, just knowing that the new technologies that are becoming out on audio are trying to make it easier for people to be able to brighten up a snare drum, for example, right, or to apply a gate or compressor at the right level, but it's kind of like the difficulties there are knowing what those things actually do versus it's like we've changed our aspect on audio to be more so towards the person who has no clue about it. Let's make everything a little bit more universal and easier for people to understand. So like if you turn this brightness knob up, you're going to hear the highs actually increase over the mids, so it's going to brighten it up a little bit. Doesn't necessarily mean it's fixing anything or it's the right move. That's just what it's going to do.
Right.
But like in the respect, like BoxCast, we just released a feature inside of our dashboard that allows you to see the audio meters now, where you can actually get the audio meters. But we put it in, and I think it's cool we did this. We gave the 3 audio measurements, like we gave you LUFS, peak, and RMS. Well,
Wow.
yeah, and the problem is, here's the problem for most people: nobody understands what peaks, LUFS, and RMS is. Right. So what do you do with that? Like, how do you understand what
Right.
what each one does? And I think the concepts that you're talking about are, there are new things coming out that are going to make that easier, but then if we drill down, the expert could then drill down further and get more of a wider, broadened scope. So I guess my question for you in the previous is like, what things do you see or are afraid of, or maybe you're excited for, that are coming down the line that makes that a possibility? Like, because I mean, your whole job is literally centered around explaining these things and making it, AKA stupid proof, right? Like, I mean, dummy proof for people to get. I mean, because quite honestly, I know audio and enough, but I'm not at the level of, say, like a Luke Hendrickson or,
Right.
or a Bethel church in Tiller. Like I don't know everything. I know a lot, and I have a small reinforcement degree behind me, but that doesn't help, when
Right.
audio changes in scope. But like you do, you've got the beat and the pulse. So like, what are some of these things that are coming down the pipeline now, or what are some of the things you hope are coming down the pipeline that would make this a little bit easier, or would actually make it detrimental?
There's nothing really that could scare me in what's coming in audio technology, because even if, like, as much as things get easier, it still takes good systems and processes with the people implementing it,
Mm-hmm.
to do it in a way that's wise and that helps everywhere. Like, you have to understand, well, let's take system tuning, for instance. There's a lot of system processors for your speakers that will let you, plug in a mic and set up that mic, and it will automatically do it for you.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that could be helpful, but it doesn't tell the whole story, because that's one measurement at one point in space. And so maybe you put it in the middle of your room, but it sounds vastly different in the very front, where your pastor sits, perhaps, and vastly different in the very back. And if you don't take those measurements or know to check for all of those, there might be a problem that your system processor can't solve. Or,
Right.
you've got an EQ problem that your system processor is fixing, but it's creating another problem somewhere else because you didn't actually point the right speakers in the right place. So there's a lot of technology that's helping people get stuff going, but there's still a lot of the gear between the ears that has to know what it is that it can do and what it is that it can't do,
For sure.
so
Yeah.
that you can make good decisions. I think
Absolutely.
the information about, having, level meters with peak, average or RMS signals, and LUFS, or how we kind of measure loudness, that's helpful. But if somebody was trying to get, like, they were trying to push their levels up so much that their LUFS were up at -5, and they
Ooh.
were really, really pushing it and really cranking down on, say, their limiter so that they didn't clip on the peak meter, they would run into problems because they don't understand, LUFS at -12 is plenty loud. And
Oh
if you
yeah.
get LUFS too high, YouTube's going to turn you down anyway. They're basically going to, cut your max volume. And so then you're just limiting stuff for no added benefit.
Right.
So there's still, lots that can be done. There's lots that can be programmed, which is exciting. I was chatting with a guy about, having some auto mixer kind of function where it, figures out, what input is this and how do we mix it? And then,
Mm-hmm.
where should it be and how should it fit together? We're still a long ways off before that stuff. We used to have like the beta version 1 or the, version 0.1 on a lot of that stuff. And it's exciting, but it still takes a human to know, to say, well, that ain't right, and we need to fix it. Like,
Right.
you have to have the idea of what should music sound like, and we haven't taught computers that quite yet. Uh, it still takes the human element of what, like, who's singing the melody, how far back should the harmony parts be behind the lead vocal, what's going to fit right here, all these different things that really take the human creative element. Like, if you've ever seen those, like, YouTube videos of, like, machines trying to play music, like they're trying to teach robots how to play
Yeah.
music, and it's like, you wouldn't think that it'd be that hard to, like, strum a guitar in time or with some sort of feel, or even if it was like just, straight eighth notes that should be super tight, it's still really bad, right? So we're still a long
Right.
ways off before machines and technology know how to make music or know how to make music sound right.
Yeah.
And that's, one of those elements. You cannot skip that step, When you're teaching people how to run sound, you have to do critical listening together to get on the same page of this is how it should
Yeah.
feel before, things start sounding good. You can set all the stuff up technically perfectly. Every bit, every chunk of data is getting to the right place. Every level is perfect on, the meters. But unless you have that musical feeling part down with it, you're just things aren't going to come together and feel right for other
Yeah.
humans that are listening, right?
Well, well, you just said it. There's the human aspect. There's the human aspect that comes into that. And I think let's just call this what we're talking about here. We're talking about AI, right? We're talking about AI. We're talking about something being able to be taught or learned how to, as the kids say, learnt that, how we got to teach it to do it, right? We got to teach it to do it. And then you got to have an auto mixing system that goes in and does it. I mean, it's different because the way that I see a lot of things in video as well, in audio and video as well, when you put something that's smart into it, there's always the capacity for it to be dumb. And that's just because it either works or it doesn't work, and it talks in ones and zeros, right? So it's on or off. And in this case, take for example, and I've used them in some regard, and I've used it and I didn't like it, is like the XY mixing that occurs on some consoles, the XY mixing. And if you're not familiar with XY mixing, I'll let James explain it better than me, but basically you take a set of microphones and it will turn a microphone on or off, or it'll reduce its gain and bring it back up to eliminate specific issues only when there's enough signal coming through on one mic. So that way you're not getting feedback in the room, or you're not causing some really weird audio issue. That's what XY mixing does. So it'll take like 2-4 microphones or 2-4 inputs, and it'll automatically begin to move them up and down. So that way you're not creating issues between a priority. So it creates a priority on a microphone. So, I mean, that's basically it, right? Like in dumb man's terms, with my gear between the ears here, dumb man's, that's what it is. But like doing that from like Shure, for example, Shure has some of that built into their microphones already, where it's doing the ones and zeros, but you got to tell it how to do it.
Right.
And that's the aspect, right? We're kicking in the human regard here. But if we take that human piece to the puzzle, right? If we take that human piece to the puzzle and we apply it to say something that is a major issue in the audio world, and that's making your audio sound better, even over a live stream, and then we apply the technology behind it, is there a world in which we live that man and machine can work co-hand and kind of make their live streaming audio sound better? Because obviously the goal for any content is to put it out there so that the world can see it, with the hopes of either changing somebody's life or making somebody laugh or bringing somebody to the church or getting money in donation, like XYZ, you know what I mean? So is there a world where we live in that? Is that even a possibility? Is it out of the realm of possibility? What do you think?
I think it's within the realm of possibility, but I still think it's a few years down the road. I don't think that the implementation is there for making audio a part of that's so automated that it can just happen in the background, unless you have a very narrow range of types of inputs, right? The XY mixer you're talking about, there are other iterations of it, and some of them work better, like the Dugan Auto Mixer, the guy that came up with it.
Yep.
It works much more elegantly than other solutions of auto mic mixers and things like that. So it's possible for spoken word, but in the realm of music, there is so much nuance that it's going to be rare that it's going to work well, unless you're like basically just playing tracks that are already mixed. Like you think about like Disney performances, that's the same performance, every 5 minutes, and they're
Yeah.
switching mics back and forth,
Yeah.
according to time code, and the things on the stage are moving around because they're, it's all linked to time code.
But that's
That's
been
fine, but there's
programmed.
very little variation from the human elements.
Yeah,
Right?
that's been programmed into it, So
Right.
like, I mean, that's a programming thing that's gone years into the making. When It's a Small World triggers when some child cries, it's like, I get that. I totally get that. Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
see what you're saying. Yeah, and it makes sense. So James, how do we take, like, because in the world of teaching people this concepts, how do we take that so that they can take their content and make it better for outreach and engagement? Like, how do we apply some of these things that are possibly going to happen or are already currently happening? Say, like, for example, something as simple as not being present in the room while you're mixing your audio.
Yeah.
Like that's a major challenge for some people. They just don't have the staff or the expertise.
Right. Well, I think there's ways that data bandwidth and its increase has really made it possible for a lot more to happen in more like real time than we've been able to think about even in the last 10 years. So like Kansas City has Google Fiber, so I've got, gigabit internet. Yeah, I know, right?
Ooh.
We're not just famous for the Chiefs anymore. We've got fast internet.
You got Google behind you, buddy.
Yes.
That's the thing.
The Silicon Prairie is what they call it. So the ability to hear a church service remotely in lower latency, and then even kind of remoting into a digital audio workstation where you're just controlling a computer locally, but you're able to hear it in low latency. That's made it so that there are people that can sit at home in their home studio monitoring on great, studio monitors and knowing your service so that they can mix it remotely and bring their expertise without having to be on site. So you could apply that to an across the country thing. I've got a friend that has an agency with techs that mix, all day on Sunday, a couple times a month. And that's how they help these churches as they're engaging in their church service, mixing their worship set and bringing their expertise. They don't have to be there on site. You could be in some small town in the middle of nowhere that has one single audio engineer or none, and yet you can get the expertise right there to help you out. And there's the lower latency is the big deal. So we've got lower latency and higher fidelity, where we can actually hear kind of an uncompressed audio signal with just a few milliseconds of latency. And a few, I mean like 200 to 500, but that's way better than 30 seconds latency.
Yeah.
Like some churches, right after the pandemic, they get their streaming set up and they don't know where to monitor. So they're trying to mix listening to YouTube that's like 30 seconds or 45 seconds later. That's like you're trying to drive a bus, but all you can see is what happened 30 seconds ago. I mean, it's like, oh, there was my turn. It's a mile back now. Like I can't do anything.
I love
about
the
that.
analogies, man. Every time you come on or I talk to you, there's a great analogy that comes out of these things. I love it. It's like driving a bus and looking at things 30 seconds in the past. I love it. That was good. Yeah.
I mean, imagine like you will be off the road more than on the road if that's the way that you're doing it. But with the lower latency monitoring, it's way easier to be able to make those changes. And you could be in the building, you could be in your car, in the parking lot if you've got Wi-Fi that'll reach, or you could be across the country and you could be participating in crafting the presentation of that worship service. I mean, it's a beautiful thing.
But do you think the technology is there yet? That's a big part of the question. We may have the bandwidth, and we may have the data capacity, but is the technology far and further enough for those things to actually occur? Because you and I both know that outside of video being a primary aspect to any live stream or any content creation, audio is really the king of it all, because that's really what is running. That's what's fueling everything. I mean, you don't want to watch a football game without audio. You don't want to watch a church service without audio. How many times do you jump into a live stream and somebody says, hey, there's no audio on this guy's mic, or hey, I can't hear the band because there's no audio? Like, nobody goes and says, hey, there's no video, because they can see that there's no video, right? Like, it's just common sense. There's no video. So, so the audio is king in that regard. So is the technology there? Can churches even leverage the current technology that they have to do that? And what are some of the gaps that hinders that? Because we know video audio content makes good outreach and engagement pieces. Like, you use that to build your community inside of your community. So are we there yet? Can we be there?
I think so. I think I know so. I know you can set up a system where you can have remote control of another computer. That's no problem. We can have a computer controlling a console. That's not a big jump. We've been able to do that for a long time. So really, it's going through the steps of getting everything lined up where you've got an audio feed, you've got the console remote controlled by a computer, and you've got remote control of that computer from another computer to some place where you can listen. And by setting all of that up, you can actually mix remotely, and it's not very difficult. Well, I wouldn't say it's not difficult for the technology if you've got all the infrastructure set up, and it just takes time and troubleshooting, right? When
Mhm.
all that's everything in
That's
tech, time and
everything.
troubleshooting. Um,
Literally everything hinges on time and troubleshooting.
right. And making sure that it's reliable and it's not going to have dropouts, right? So the reliability of that connection to remote control, like knowing like how are you going to set up a backup if something goes down, or like
Mhm.
what's your game plan for this going out? It's totally doable. It's just not very simple to get through all the steps at this point.
Right, right. Then that makes sense. That makes sense. So you believe the technology is there. It's just the implementation of that technology, and then going from that implementation to practical use. Right.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, even having somebody that knows how to mix a broadcast, like studio mixing is different than live mixing, right? So there's different needs for what a studio or broadcast mix needs to sound like to sound good everywhere. Whereas live mixing, it just has to sound good right here.
There.
Like
Right. Exactly.
I can hear the speakers in the room where everybody is listening. And if I make changes, I hear those changes the same way that everybody else hears those changes.
Right.
For a broadcast, there's a lot of moving parts that need to be much narrower because we're listening on a whole bunch of different devices, right?
Sure.
Somebody's listening on their phone, right? Because your phone is also listening to you, but that's a different topic.
As we found out earlier today.
Yes. So your people are listening on phones, which are very vocal forward, right? It's a
Yeah.
telephone, right? It's for talking to another human. It's made for voice reproduction, right? So people listening on phones with a tiny speaker, it's going to make the vocals feel way out in front. Where people that are listening, say they've got a hi-fi system, or let's just say somebody's set up a an overflow room and they've put up a couple speakers in there, and you're listening using the broadcast feed, right? That has to be like that's going to have a lot more ability to reproduce the band and instruments. So uh, that's going to make the vocal feel a little bit more tucked back, especially if the speakers
Mhm.
are farther apart from each other. This is, nerdy mono stereo summation stuff. But like the way that people are listening is really varied. So you can't just like park the vocal out in front like you do in a live mix and say, I can hear the vocal, so it must be good. For a broadcast, you you've got to get the vocal pocket right. Right. So it's got to
Oh, that's
sound
good.
good in mono, right? Where you sum it down to mono or you listen on your phone. And it's got to sound good in stereo, and then headphones are a whole other thing. So you've got to get the vocal just right with the band because you don't want it to sound like, a head floating out there in the middle of space.
Well, I
And you
mean,
don't want it to sound like, oh, wow, there's a big band, but I can't hear the vocals for anything because we're there to
yeah.
sing along with the vocals. We're
Right.
tuning in to sing along with the vocals. Even if somebody's in their living room, they should be able to sing along with it. That's the whole idea. So we've got to get that vocal balance right. And that's not just immediately obvious if you set up a couple studio monitors, in a room someplace. You have to know how to fine tune that stuff. And that
Mhm.
doesn't even talk about dynamic range and, the peak to RMS and LUFS and all that stuff.
Right.
There's a lot of targets that are not immediately obvious for making a great broadcast mix. And then, like when that stuff, if you get it mixed right on the front end, that's when you can take it and make it into social media content. And if you can just trim it and not have to remix it, that greatly speeds up your ability to
Oh, yeah.
put stuff out on social media channels, to show clips, to show reels. When it's consistent, then you can take, different Sundays and different things and make it all, one thing. Uh, yeah, the audio portion, I wouldn't say that it's more important than video, but it's kind of like it's a deal breaker. If you've got great video, but the audio is terrible, people are not going to hang around and watch.
That's a good point.
Whereas if you have great audio and the video's
Meh.
so, you can see what's going on, right? It doesn't have to be cinematic for it to be effective, but you have to like understand what's going on. But there's good audio, or at least compelling audio. Heck, you could even put stills up over great audio and switch stills, and that can be really effective for post content if the audio's there. You know, like if the audio is there, consistent, clear, noise free, it greatly reduces the amount of work that you have to do to make compelling content.
That's funny that you said post content, because I'm glad you said post, because all I envisioned was me taking my church service and stills, and you hear the pastor talk, and all of a sudden he's like this, and then he's like this, and he's like this, and then still after still after still. Now, understandably, for the nerd out there, that's all video is just a bunch of stills mashed in together. I get that, but like, just imagine, you know, like your master. That's all I saw. I'm like, I'm glad he said post content, because if he didn't say post, then that would have totally made no sense whatsoever. But yes, I
got
agree.
A frame rate of 3.
Yeah, one frame a second. Yeah, yep, I love that. But you make an excellent point there. You know, audio. See, that's the thing where I live. Like, in your point, audio, it's the make or break to a really good because I mean, if you're watching, I don't use TikTok, but if you're looking at TikTok or you're doing Instagram, you know, reels, or you're scrolling through shorts on YouTube or whatever, the audio is really, I think the audio is the key thing. But now you're starting to see audio coupled with a visual aspect, which is that captioning, which is also another important piece to having anything, because people don't necessarily listen to what they're watching, they're reading it now. So I mean, there's that whole aspect. And if you don't have clear audio, the captioning systems don't pick that up.
Right.
But then there's the whole play into using that content in your church for really good community driven things. And I think personally, audio has to play just as much of a priority role as video, but not as like, it's above that. Video is not as tailored or high, because I mean, you can get a great camera and you can do work over time for lighting, and your video should look pretty decent. But the audio is really difficult. Like, you don't need a camera that does ISO. We have an automatic setting that does all that for you, you know, where in the audio we don't. But I love how, thank you, Apple, for that. Thank you. So that's happened more than once today, and I love it. Listen, if you're out there and you're watching this today, I heart you so much right now. Oh, there you go. There we go. We're going to add that into the podcast episode. It's awesome. But there's like, oh yeah, never, I'm not going to do it. But there's like so many things that audio needs to be done and done correctly. And I think the problem is that the church right now is facing a massive issue with doing audio correctly for their content, for their live stream, for their in-house mixing. And for someone to be like, when we're talking about this whole aspect of being, you know, gone or remote, to have the aspect to have somebody say, hey, this is not working, or it's not turned up, and someone to jump in who knows what they're doing from 500 miles away is a game changer, especially if it's implemented correctly.
Right.
And it has to be intuitive and easy to use. So there's that whole aspect there. You know, training people to use technology is also probably the hardest piece of this. Like, you and I have an ear for audio. Like, we can hear certain frequencies, but, you know, Sister Sue may not. And training somebody to have an ear is probably the most difficult piece to training in audio. You can teach somebody the console. You can teach somebody how everything routes. That's not hard. But teaching somebody to hear that that's too muddy, or there's too much gate occurring on the snare, right? Or maybe we have a ducker issue. Like, maybe we're compressing that too much to where it's really just sounds like that's a tough gig. That's a tough thing to do. So I guess when it comes to technology, as we begin to land this plane down, you know, for the final approach, when it comes to audio in your live stream and your technology, what would you prioritize? Like, what is the one thing you would tell somebody? Start here, especially knowing that we're headed in a direction where AI could be taking over at some point or helping in that regard. Where would you start right now to making your audio content better on your live stream? And I swear, if you say anything that revolves around EQs, I'm gonna jump as high as I can. Don't say EQ. Don't say it. Don't say it. Don't say it.
No, I think making sure that your balance is right and that you can get the dynamic range correct. You know,
You
if things
said
sound
EQ. You
clear
just
and
said EQ. You just said EQ. Don't even play with
I said
me.
dynamic range. That's a compressor, okay?
I know, but it's just as bad.
uh, no, you have to get the balance right, and that's like the fader's in the right spot relative to something else, right?
Right.
If you get things balanced well, and in the room, you can set up a system that makes that translate to your live stream as well. You can make it work for you if the basic balance stuff is right. All right. I know you love my analogies, so I say that a great mix has 4 pillars to it and then 3
Mhm.
finishing touches. So imagine you got 4 pillars holding up a roof, and then the finishing touches are like the trim around the roof, right? And the main pillars are number 1, getting a good sound source. Number 2, capturing that sound source the right way with the right mic placement. 3 is balance and gain structure, right? Making sure that the
Mm.
console is set up so that it's easy to make things balance and you can make adjustments to how the music needs to do it as you're going. And then I know you told me not to say anything about EQ, but high pass filters and low pass filters. Cutting out the stuff that you don't need in that signal is going to help it sound clearer,
Okay,
right?
that's
So
fair. That's fair.
your guitars don't need to thump, right? You can carve that space out so there's more room for the bass guitar to thump, for the kick drum to thump, right? So there's that aspect to it where you've built your 4 pillars, and then the finishing touches are EQ, compression, and effects, right? But if you get those 4 pillars right, you're like 85% of the way to a great mix.
Mm.
Especially if you've gotten your arrangement down, people are playing parts in the right place. If people are playing the right parts, right, then it's a lot easier to get things dialed in. You don't have to use EQ if people's notes and tones are in the right spot, aside from vocals, but that's just a different thing. You have to EQ vocals. You can't get around
Yeah.
that. You got
No,
to
you
learn how to
have
do
to.
that. If you
Yeah.
don't know, check out my YouTube videos about it. I've got several. You have to EQ vocals to make them sound good, right? So you're not going to
Absolutely.
like skate on that one or just buy a new mic to fix that one. You have to use EQ. So there's that
Absolutely.
aspect of it where you have to get those pillars in place. Then everything else is just gravy with the finishing touches of EQ, or I need my snare a little bit brighter, or I need my kick drum a little thumpier, or I want this guitar a little bit darker because it's a little cheap and jangly sounding. There's little things like that, but those are finishing touches after you've got those 4 pillars in place.
Right.
If you've captured it the right way, if you've got great sounding instruments, if you've got a good arrangement, if you've cut out the stuff that doesn't need to be in that input with the high pass filter and the low pass filter, you're going to be in really good shape. And that's going to show both in the room and for your live stream mix.
I like that. I like that. I like the fact that you didn't start with EQs, but you finished with them. That's good. Yeah. Okay,
Yes.
James. Okay, James. I see how it works. All right. Are you still a Personas guy or what?
Man, I am console agnostic. I love them all.
That's my man.
Yes. So a tool is a tool to me. I love anything that will mix stuff and do what I need it to do. I'm down for it. So if it's
Oh,
an analog mixer, I'm cool with that. If it's Behringer X32, or if it's a Digico with a Waves sound grid, whatever, Allen and Heath stuff, I love their stuff too. Yamaha, it's going to work forever. They're the Toyota Camrys of the audio world.
I was just gonna say they're the Honda Civics of the audio world.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
and then
Well, and I drive a Toyota Camry that's got like 230,000 miles on it. So I know, like it's just going to keep running. And I've had Yamaha M7CLs that have worked for like 8 years with just a few fader replacements, and they're good to go. Like
right.
it's just going to keep working.
That's
So,
right, man. That's right. All right, one last question for you, and then we're gonna land this plane fully and get our people on off board. Wired or wireless? Which one would you choose?
oh, wired makes life so much easier and cheaper. If you can handle the look, right? If you don't have to have like a super clean stage, or like, like your pastor doesn't have to be speaking on a totally clean stage with like a couple props and an LED wall. as the only things on there. If you can handle wired, and if you can like pick up the mic stand with the wire and move it out of the way, wired will save you so much headache and money.
That's awesome.
The other thing about wireless is wireless microphones are often competing with TV stations in the frequencies that they use.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not like TV stations change all the time. So it's like we can coexist quite well. However, when a TV station switches frequencies, they do it Saturday night. So on Sunday morning, something could have worked. Saturday could have worked, midweek for, Thursday night rehearsal. Suddenly a TV station is now stomping all over that frequency that you had for your lead pastor. Yeah, you're going to have problems. You're going to have to find a new frequency for that. And if you skimped on the inexpensive wireless gear, which wireless gear gets expensive fast.
Yes, it does. Oh, yeah.
If you skimped at all, it could be challenging to find a new frequency and to do it in the 30 minutes you have before service starts, or even if you figured that out. So if you do have wireless stuff, make sure that you turn on your receivers before you turn on your transmitters and see if you're getting a bunch of RF signal before your transmitter is on. That might mean that some TV station is just, hogging that lane and messing you up. So watch out for that one.
Good tips there, bro, to close that out. Appreciate that. That was good. That's some good stuff. So the point of this, the whole thing that James is telling you at this point forward is don't live near a TV station. So there you go. You're all set. Okay.
Right.
Live somewhere out in the middle of nowhere. You guys are good. Or church should be out in the middle of nowhere. You're okay. Anyway, James, thank you, my friend, for coming back onto the BoxCast podcast. In fact, the cool thing is we're going to see you September 10th. You're presenting at our launch event, which I'm super excited about, and I cannot wait. If you want to check out a preview of that, go ahead and check out the clip that's going to play right now.
And today we're going to be talking about 5 things every worship leader needs to know about sound. If you haven't noticed already, great video always includes great audio. So let's jump into number 1. The first thing you need to know as a worship leader is that there's a difference between a great broadcast mix and a great in-house mix. The requirements that we have for what feels good over a broadcast on a bunch of different devices is very different from what feels good in the room. So you have to treat them differently, and you have to know what those differences are. For one, the levels in our room can go way up and way down. And it feels good because we've got a nice big sound system and a bunch of people around us to sing with. But at home, people are keeping their levels a lot lower, so we have to keep the levels going to the broadcast a lot more consistent so that they don't have to turn their device up and down. It's not an easy one to tackle, but hey, if it was easy, they wouldn't need us.
They asked me to talk about a few things today. They asked me to talk about systems and structures and presence and practice. That's right, we're gonna talk about practice today. Structures, super important, right? You can't get mad at what you tolerate. I'm gonna say that again. You can't get mad or frustrated with what you tolerate. So if there's something that you've been tolerating for a long time and it upsets you, well, that's on you, right? So we gotta stop tolerating maybe things that aren't okay, or showing up late, or showing up unprepared, those types of things. We gotta have structures in place, and so we gotta have things that we can hold people accountable to, as well as ourselves. And we want them to be a part of that process of developing maybe an accountability, policy, procedure, those types of things. We want to get people's weigh in on that again so they can buy in.
Do you want to know my secret to creating branded content and why it matters to your church? Now, we've all heard the term branding, but in the context of the church, what does it really mean, and why should it matter to us as ministry leaders? Well, let's dive in. So number 1, branding is more than a logo. First, let's clarify something. The church's brand isn't just your logo, your colors, or your website design. Those are all part of your branding identity, but your brand is ultimately the perception that people have when they think about your church. Now, we call that your thread. You're known for something now, whether controlled or uncontrolled, whether that's positive or negative. Branding is just controlling that perception. It's also controlling the feelings that they get, the expectations that they form, and the experiences they anticipate. So the content you create needs to align with and reinforce that perception.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that clip. James, thanks again, man, for being with us. We really appreciate your time and all of your expertise. And tell the people where they can still find you.
Hey, I post almost every week at youtube.com/Attaway Audio. Attaway with 2 T's. I'm sure you see it at the bottom of the screen anyway. And then AttawayAudio.com. We've got some free resources for you over there, including how to lead your church sound team. We talked about the critical listening part, but you have to define what good sound is for your church. So I developed a guide for you. You can find it at attawayaudio.com/BoxCast. That will take you to it. You can download it and get clear language for course corrections, for understanding what a great mix is going to feel like for your congregation. And little hint, it's not going to sound like the congregation down the street or the church that you're watching online that you think is awesome. It's got to fit your people. So get clear on that language. It makes it a lot easier for telling sound techs, hey, I need you to make this change. It's a fantastic resource for you.
Beautiful.
So attawayaudio.com/BoxCast. You can download it there.
Absolutely. Check out the description down below for that link. Again, James, thanks, buddy. Hope you have a great day. We'll see you in just a few weeks.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and we'll see you at the launch event.